most of you probably saw the video I did 5 months ago where I showed off my little solar system I created as part of my emergency backup plan. It has been running fine for a year and a half at this point. Now I've been using it to power my office room basically 24 hours per day, every day. It runs the lights, my computer, a window unit air conditioner, and during the winter I run a space heater on it. Now this system gave me around 700 watts of power during the day, which was more than I needed. On most days I was generating about 4 kilowatt hours with it. By comparison, on average I'm using around 100 kilowatt hours per day, and that includes my home, the studio building, and 3 electric cars here in the household. So that means my solar system's generating a little less than 5% of my total usage. However, we had an unusually long heat wave this summer, and I got the largest electricity bill I've ever seen. And that's despite the fact that I was making some of that power myself. So I kept looking at this bill and then looking at my solar system running and thinking, gee, I wish I could make a bit more of my own power. And thus I began the process of upgrading my home solar system. Only I wanted to add solar to the studio building as well, so I'm actually creating 2 follow-up episodes. I'll show you what I did to the home solar system in a later video. This video will concentrate on the studio building. Okay, now here is the awkward part. So, as a general rule, you know that I don't do sponsorships on my channel. And believe me, it's not for a lack of people asking. I mean, every day I get emails from people asking me to sponsor their VPN service or their PCB service or some video game for iPhone or Android or some nonsense like that. And I just always say no, I don't do it out of principle. And for similar reasons, I don't do mid-roll ads on YouTube, and I don't do Amazon affiliate sales, and I don't beg people to like and subscribe and click the notification bell and all the annoying things that I see on other YouTube channels. So, however, having said that, I must tell you that this particular video, just this one, is in fact sponsored by Ecoflow. Now, the truth of the matter is, I was actually going to buy this equipment anyway, and I guess Ecoflow saw my last solar video, and so they reached out to me and they offered to send me 2 of these Delta Pro units, which is exactly what I was going to buy. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, it won't really change the nature of the video any, but it will mean I'll be a little less poor at the end of the video. So I went ahead and took them up on it. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to explain is that there won't be actually anything different about this video other than the fact that I just needed to disclose that information. Of course, I can't do much with these Ecoflow units yet because I don't have any solar panels installed, so let's get to work on that. As I mentioned in the last video, I had originally toyed with making a solar patio cover like this. And I've actually been needing a patio cover for at least 3 different reasons. Now, one would be to give me some shade on my window during the summer. The second and perhaps more important reason is that I have a problem with water leaking in this door. You can actually see here at the corner some of the water damage, and I have tried replacing the threshold and the door sweep, but it still keeps happening, and a gentle rain doesn't seem to be a problem. But when it thunderstorms and it rains sideways, water hits the door, runs down to the bottom, and then I end up having a big puddle down here in the carpet that I have to clean up. So any sort of patio cover would help in keeping rain off of this door. The third reason for such a thing would be for solar panels. Now, unfortunately, the part of the roof that would be good for mounting solar panels would be the long backside here. But as you can see, that part of the roof basically never gets sunlight at all since it faces east and there are some really tall trees on that side. So while this design would be somewhat easy to build, I didn't really like the placement of the posts. Not to mention if one of the panels ever broke, I'd have to find an exact replacement. So I instead decided to go with building something more like a pergola. So I thought, yeah, I could just build this and then mount whatever solar panels I want on top of it. Oh, and I guess this would be a good time to tell you about a simultaneous project I'm working on. If you recall from the original construction videos, the smaller room on the left here was always meant to be just a storage shed, but it ended up being more of a junk room, and I really needed the extra space in the studio, so I got to thinking, what if I cut a doorway at the back of the studio room leading into the little room and essentially annex it as part of the studio. And then in the smaller room I could put some shelves and another small workbench. So I got to working on that several months ago, as you can see in this older video. So that's where the solar equipment will go, and you'll see more of an update on that later in the video. I acquired some more solar panels from Christopher Bean, who lives in town and deals in used panels. These are Jinko panels, and they're a bit larger than the ones I used before on my house, and they are rated at 395 watts. And I think I paid around $175 a piece for them. Of course, you'll probably never see that power rating, but we'll see shortly what kind of power I'm able to get out of them. Of course, after having these laying on the ground a few days, it rained, and this is when I realized that water would pool on the top of these, so I figured I'd better add at least some amount of slant to the pergola. So I got to work building the pergola, starting with drilling some holes in the concrete patio. And I bolted these mounts down with a 6-inch concrete anchor. I got the one board attached to the roof, but I wanted to keep most of the weight of this thing freestanding, so I am using 4 posts. I constructed most of the support structure on my mom's back porch next door, since it was still about 100 degrees outside, despite being September. Then a friend of mine came over at night and helped me raise the supports. Les held the posts level while I attached a temporary brace to the side, and then it was time to start hanging rafters. Of course, because of the slant, I had to modify each of the rafters with a jigsaw, and since the structure was more or less stable at this point, I was able to cut and hang the rest of them the next day. And here we go. This is basically the finished pergola. Now it is time for some paint. Actually, this is stain used for decks and stuff like that, but it looks a lot like paint. Anyway, 2 days later, and here we are. The painting is done. Of course, one problem I noticed, which wasn't unexpected, is that the corner post is blocking the camera. So I took it down, and I was hoping to have enough slack up in the eave to be able to move the camera to the post, but that wasn't happening. So that means going up into the attic for the first time since this building was constructed. It's miserable up here. It's hot, cramped, it's covered in fiberglass insulation. However, I did manage to free up about a foot of extra slack, and so that's what I needed. At least I didn't have to run a new wire. So I mounted the camera to the post, and the view looks much better now. And now it's time to mount some solar panels. Originally, I had planned to mount 4 panels like this, but that's because when I went to some website to get the measurements from these panels, and it seems like they would have fit when I designed it in SketchUp, but I had a feeling the panels were larger than that, so I measured them myself, and I found that this is how they would really look, which was just not acceptable. So I decided to go with just 3 panels arranged like this. My friend Sean came by and helped me get the first one up. And the great thing is, these panels just slide right in under the shingles, so this should keep the water flowing from the roof all the way down to the end of the panel. At least it keeps it away from the door. So now it's time to use some brackets and screw these down. And with a normal roof mount, you have to elevate these off the roof some so air can circulate underneath. But that's not needed on this design. I can basically just use these L brackets and mount them straight to the wood. I drilled holes in the aluminum frame, that way I could use some bolts and washers and lock them down. And so here's the 3 panels mounted. They aren't connected to anything yet, electrically speaking, but I was pretty happy with the mounting result. It's very nice having some shade on the porch. It really wasn't all that expensive to build this. I think I spent around $400 in lumber and other parts, and then the 3 panels cost around $550. These panels actually probably cost less than what it would cost to put OSB up there and shingle it. So that makes this portion of the project about $1,000 and a week's worth of my own labor to build it. Soon after building the pergola, we had a moderately hard rainstorm. This was a chance to see if it worked to keep my door from leaking. Of course, water was dripping between the panels, which was to be expected, but more importantly, the door was still dry, which was one of the main 3 goals of this project. And of course, the carpet inside was also still dry, so I'd say that part is a success. So now let's talk about using the solar panels. In my last video, I set up a transfer switch, which lets me select individual circuits of the house to be powered by the grid or powered by solar, but I decided to go with a different approach to the studio building. This building only consumes about 600 watts of power on average to run everything, so I felt like I should be able to run the whole building off grid. The other thing is, I wanted to be able to run these mini split air conditioners, which require 240 volts. Now that's been a constant thorn in my side for figuring out how to power these, since most of the affordable solar generators only output 120 volts. So just a refresher on how American homes are powered, we have two hots, a neutral, and a ground. And there's 120 volts between each hot and neutral, and there's 240 volts between the two hots. Now, if I didn't have anything that needed 240 volts, I could actually power the building from a single 120 volt source, pretty much like this. Just combine the two hots. Or if you were worried about too many amps being pulled through the single wire, you could always do it like this, which would spread out the load a bit. And you could plug each hot into its own plug, like this. But with this configuration, it means that you won't have 240 volts between the hots. Instead, you'll have 0 volts, which means my air conditioner won't work. I mean, it won't hurt it to receive 0 volts, it just won't do anything. Okay, so now let's talk about these Ecoflow deltas and how this is going to work. First, I want to dispel a myth I saw repeated a few times in the comments section of my last video, which is that you can't even run a hairdryer on something like this. Well, fun fact, a hairdryer is one of the most energy-hungry appliances you can get. This one pulls 2,000 watts. And as you can see, you most certainly can run it. But yes, it does draw a lot of power, so no, you can't run it all day long. But most people would only run one for a few minutes anyway, which is fine. It's all about average power usage. So let me tell you what I like and don't like about these Ecoflow Delta Pros. I like the screen. It's got a large segment display, which is much easier to read at a glance than the tiny little numbers on my Bluetti system. And even better yet, there's this. You can get what's called a remote, and it will work over Bluetooth, but my preference is the Ethernet cable. Just plug it in like so, and voila! Now you can mount this screen wherever you want and see what's going on. It's basically a duplicate of what's displayed on the unit. And yes, there is a smartphone app as well, but I prefer the convenience of the remote screen. Okay, so here you've got your USB ports, which is pretty standard stuff these days on these type of devices. Down here, these are all 120 volt outlets. This one here is just a higher amp version. It goes up to 30 amps, which is the kind you would use with like an RV. Unfortunately, I actually will not be using any of these in my solar setup, and you'll see why shortly. Okay, so over here on the side, there's a number of other types of outputs, such as 12 volt outputs, and some stuff for pairing your Bluetooth and all that kind of stuff. Don't really need any of that for what I'm going to be doing, except for this remote port, of course. Oh, and down here on the bottom, you can push this, and it pulls out, and this is actually a carry handle where you can kind of walk around with this like a piece of luggage. Down here, this is called the infinity port, and this is actually what I'm going to be using, and you'll see why here just shortly. So, around in the back, you'll see we do have wheels, which, interestingly enough, will actually spin when it's sitting. They only make contact when you lift up the front. Around here on the back, we've got 2 ports for plugging in external battery packs. That way you can increase your capacity. And so back here is where all of your inputs are. So let's open that up, and as you can see, this is where you could charge on AC power, and of course how we're going to be charging it on solar. And of course they provide this cable. This is actually what plugs into the back of the Ecoflow, and then that converts into regular MC4 connectors like pretty much every solar panel uses. All right, so let's talk about this infinity port again for another moment. There's actually 2 different things that I know you can do with it. One of them is they give you this interesting little device. If you don't recognize what that is, that's an electric vehicle charge port. So in theory, you could plug this in here, and then you could plug this into an EV charger, which would charge this thing up really fast. So let's take this thing into the garage and try it out. So it's not meant for charging up an electric vehicle, rather the other way around. Basically, if you need to charge up the Ecoflow unit quickly, you can charge from an EV charger, which can deliver a lot of power. So let's try that out. So I plugged it in, and power started flowing, but it was surprisingly little. And then I remembered around on the back there's a switch that sets it to slow charge, and I didn't realize that would affect the EV charging as well. Anyway, shortly after moving that to fast mode, check that out. Yep, that is way more power than you'd be able to pull from a regular wall outlet. And it could probably do more if the battery wasn't so close to being full already. Okay, so now let me show you what I am not thrilled with. This is the dual voltage hub, and the idea here is you can plug this into the infinity port, and the other cable goes to a second Delta Pro unit, and by combining the 2 units, this gives us the split phase 240 volts with the neutral in the middle, like we talked about earlier. Now, what I don't like about this device is the way it plugs into the unit. It sticks out the side, making the overall footprint of this device much larger than it otherwise needs to be. And if this were on the floor, somebody would probably trip on it. I would have preferred something that plugs into the 30 amp outlet on each unit and maybe a small communication cable to allow them to sync up. Then the other part I don't like is that once you plug in the hub, these ports on the front shut off. I mean, you can't use them anymore, even for 120 volts. So that means the only way to get 120 volts out of the setup is to pull it from the plug here, which has both phases. And the last thing I don't like about this device is that it's kind of clunky, and they don't even provide a way to wall mount. So I'm going to try to get some custom brackets made to mount mine, otherwise this would just be laying around somewhere loose. Oh, and one more thing, my unit seems to have something loose inside of it. If that's just plastic, I don't care, but it might be a screw or something metal, and that could be a problem. So I'm going to take it apart and have a look. It appears the screws are probably under these feet, so I'll peel them back. Yep, there we go. Alright, let's see what the culprit is. Well, it's not a screw nor a piece of plastic. It looks like a blob of solder. In fact, I think I know where it came from. It appears they tried to solder these screws in place, and I think the one on the right ended up being a cold solder joint. Well, I hope that doesn't affect me any. So what I need to do here is install a 240 volt breaker that will be used as power input, and it has to be installed at the top right for reasons you'll understand shortly. But that means I need to move these breakers down here to get them out of the way. So let's get to work. Once the panel cover's off, I'm going to need to power down the whole box, which means I'll need some portable lighting. Okay, power's off. Fortunately, it looks like there's just enough slack to get these breakers moved. And there we go. I moved the air conditioner breaker down to the bottom actually. And now what I've done is created a nicer looking label for the inside of the door showing where the breakers are now. There we go. And I'll also need to remove these extra blanks. And here's my new 30 amp 240 volt breaker. This is where the power will come into the box. And now I'll reattach the front of the panel to make sure everything fits. Okay, so now I need to install this. It's called an interlock. And it's going to go right here. So what I need to do is figure out exactly where it gets mounted and then draw some circles. Now I'll drill some pilot holes. And I'll follow that up with some larger bits until I get the size correct. And now I'll install the interlock. Okay, so here's how this works. So this breaker here, of course, is going to be the solar power. It's not actually hooked up to anything yet, but it will be. Of course, this is, your regular grid power up here. Now, as you can see, I cannot turn the solar on because this interlock is in the way. So what I have to do first is turn grid power off. And yes, we're using portable lighting in here right now. Then this can slide up, and now solar power can be turned on. And then, of course, now you can't turn the grid power on because the interlock's in the way. So that's how we do that safely. Okay, so now I need to set up some sort of power input, and I found this old work box on Amazon, and I've never seen one of these in the hardware store before. As you can see with these screws, it's designed to screw into the stud rather than attach to the drywall. As such, I need to make sure I cut the hole out right next to the stud. Okay, the hole is cut. Let's see about removing this insulation. And yeah, that fits perfectly. Now I have the wires run, and I'll just screw this thing down. Okay, so here we are. Now I've got the box in. It's actually really sturdy. I'm really happy with this design of box. And by the way, these wires are not live because I can't turn the solar on even if I wanted to, because I would have to first turn off the power to the building. The problem I've got is I cannot find an inlet that is designed to go into an internal box like this. The only inlets I can find tend to be ones that are in a big old box that are designed to be mounted to the outside of your home, because, most people are going to use a generator outside. So I guess they designed the boxes that way. I can't find one that's designed to fit in a standard 2-gang box. Now I can find, something like this. This is the inlet, and of course, you need to have the male gender on an inlet rather than a female plug. So, because the idea is I can stick a female plug like this on there, and that's totally fine. It's safe to touch it, even if it were to have power going to it. But the problem is power is actually supposed to be going into this plug, which means that if I use the female plug, whatever plug that I have that I'm going to be plugging into this, that plug could be live with power, and it could shock you if you were to touch it. So what I'm going to do is temporarily install this plug in the wall so I can do some testing. Hopefully by the end of the episode I will have found a better solution than this. I'll go ahead and use this cord for testing, and the way this is wired up right now, this could technically be a power outlet and power any kind of high power device, except for the fact that this interlock makes it impossible to turn the breaker on while the panel is receiving grid power. Okay, so I set up the two Delta Pros on the floor here to test, and they aren't hooked up to the solar or anything yet, but I just needed to see if they would power everything. And sure enough, I mean, they seem to be working fine, and even the air conditioners are running. But this is a very inconvenient place to have these large units. Not only that, but it probably violates fire or electrical code because it's in front of the breaker box. So I need to find a better place to put these. And I was actually thinking that space above the breaker box looks like a pretty good spot. So I went into SketchUp and designed a little shelf, just the right size to hold these. And this is what I came up with. Keep in mind these Delta Pros are 100 pounds a piece. It will attach to the studs on the wall, but one corner will need to be supported by a post. So I got to work building this, although I had to make a few tweaks due to the location of the studs in the walls, especially on the right side over there. I needed to make sure this could hold 200 pounds, so I did a chin up on it. I'm actually about 175, but I figure that's close enough. Seems pretty sturdy, so let's finish this thing up. Okay, so what I have done here is I've gone ahead and put my signature tile on the top just to kind of give it a protective layer and make it easy to clean and whatnot. But I've also added this lip here all the way around. And the idea behind that is just to make sure that, this stuff's going to be really heavy and really high up. And I don't want anything accidentally sliding off. So that ought to take care of that. And now I'll get started painting the shelf. And I'll show you where I'm at now. The painting is done, and I did accidentally get some on the back wall, so I'll have to repaint white over that later. But anyway, I think this is going to work for what I need. I also brought in the solar wires through the attic. I still need to terminate them with MC4 connectors. Then my friend Sean came over and helped me lift these gigantic things up to the top. And I've also been working on a new top for these cabinets that turn it into a small workbench. I'm not done with the edge piece yet, but it's looking pretty nice. Okay, now let's talk about power distribution. After doing a lot of measurements, I found that the power usage of this small building can be roughly divided into two areas. 200 watts goes to power most all of the electronics in the building, which really isn't much at all. No surprise, the bulk of the power goes to the air conditioning, consuming about 600 watts on a hot day. Okay, the next problem is I planned to have 4 panels originally, but I'm down to 3. And each of the Delta Pros need to have their own solar panels, which means I have to break up the power unevenly, which turns out to not be a huge problem because when measuring the loads in the building, I found that the vast majority of the lights and electronics are on one of the phases, and the air conditioner, of course, pulls from both. But it means that one of the phases needs about twice the power as the other, so I'll just make sure to connect the 2 panels to the unit that handles the largest load. Next thing I'm going to do is install the 2 remote screens so I can see what the status is of each unit at a glance. And there we go, everything is set up. All I need to do now is get the Ecoflow units connected to the electrical system of the building. Okay, so remember this problem here? Well, I reached out to Stephen DiCarlo, who had once told me if I ever needed anything machined out of aluminum, that he could help me out. And so I sent him the dimensions of what I needed, and he got to work making 3 different things for me. One object is going to be for my power inlet so that I can mount the thing inside the box. The other 2 things are to mount my dual voltage hub to the wall. I believe he's also making a more detailed video on his own channel, and I'll put a link down in the description field. And here they are, all finished. Okay, so the idea here is we can put this inlet into this bracket, and then it can be screwed down. These holes are actually threaded, which is great. And then this can screw into the regular wall box, like so. Now, why on earth nobody makes and sells such a thing already is beyond me. I mean, I think this arrangement is much better than having a big clunky box hanging on the wall. And if I'm ever not using this inlet, I can just put the cap on it, like so. But I would imagine most of the time this is going to be plugged into it. But I need to put the rest of the cable together. But first, I'll go ahead and mount this dual voltage hub. And this is another one of those things I can't understand why Ecoflow doesn't provide a method for mounting this. Okay, all done. Now I can attach the cable on this end. And then the other end goes into the wall like so. And there we go. The setup is now complete. Time to test it. In order to power everything on, you have to use the button on the hub. And now I'll switch the building off grid power and on to solar power. Well, everything appears to be running, and yes, that includes the air conditioning. Of course, I'm doing this test after dark, so there is no solar coming in, but you can definitely see what the power draw is for the whole building with most everything turned on right now. So, like a little over 500 watts. Okay, I think that's a good test. Now I just need to wait for some sunlight, and we'll see how everything works then. Okay, the next day is here, and the sun is out. Let me give you a little tour of the place, and you'll see how things are shaping up. As you can see, I finally tidied up all of the wires for the solar panels, so they aren't hanging down anymore. Let's go inside. Here's my little office room, and here's the studio room you've seen so many times. And if we walk around the corner, you can see this room is starting to come together. But let's have a look at the solar status. So right now, we're making more power than we're using, and the rest is charging the batteries. However, the air conditioner isn't running right now because it's 70 degrees outside, and so I think normally I'm going to be using about as much power as I'm making, which means I won't have enough power left over to charge the batteries. Now, what that means, unfortunately, is that I can run the studio building off solar during the day, and I could even run the entire building overnight on battery. But the next day, there won't be enough excess solar energy to recharge the batteries. I just don't have enough panels for that. One option I've considered is adding some smaller panels in the leftover space using these skinny panels. They should fit, and that could realistically give me an extra 350 watts of power. But it would be difficult to figure out how to divide that up because I'd have mismatched panels. But another option would be to put a few more of the smaller panels on the roof here like this. And that way I could have about 700 watts of power and just put all of the small panels together on one Ecoflow unit and the 3 big ones together on the other. But that will have to be a project for another time. I also wanted to show you this. I created this as an alternative power cable. This will allow me to run the building on any 120 volt battery system or generator. It just means I can't run any air conditioners with this, like I talked about earlier when showing this diagram. But if something were to go wrong with my current system, I still have a way to power up the building. So while this setup does fall short of giving me full-time off-grid capability, it does give me the ability to run the building off-grid for a day or two at a time. But I also have a patio cover with shade, and I no longer have to worry about that door leaking. So overall, I'd say this is still a win, and I'm pretty happy with it. But that's it for this episode. As always, thanks for watching.